Fight Rita if you can. Only Quagmire knows her plan.
Giggity. It's the 18th installment of the all-new Mighty Morphin Zyurangers. Things are becoming very interesting. If you remember our last installment, Zyuranger had already presented a two-parter about a Frankenstein's monster made from special clay that required new weapons to defeat. But the story didn't end there. The defeat mutated Dora Frankie into Zombie Frankie. On top of that, Bondora erected a giant menacing column that the Zyurangers don't understand. And that's where we left off, meaning we're now coming into the third part of this storyline. However, in Power Rangers, none of that really applies. Also, I'm on camera now. Deal with it. Their two prior episodes were almost entirely standalone. The Frankenstein's monster was defeated easily and normally, and while Power Rangers is now consenting to a two-parter, its beginning is not at all connected to its previous episodes. Whew, that took a lot to explain, and that's just the setup. Here's where we are now. The next step in Bondora's plan is to perform the most powerful black magic to summon Dai Satan, which literally means Great Satan. She admits to having sold her soul to Dai Satan in order to become the witch she is today. The pillar is part of the summoning process, but it also requires the sacrifice of 13 10-year-old children within close proximity. Each home is marked with some card, and the children in question are pulled into reflections. The Zyurangers attempt to shield the final girl, but they fail. Dai Satan appears, he upgrades Zombie Frankie into Satan Frankie, and the Zyurangers don't fare too well. Here in America, hypersensitive parents take things like Satan and child sacrifice way too seriously. I don't really think there's anything in this episode of Zyuranger that is inappropriate for children to watch, but regardless of whether or not you agree, there's no way Mighty Morphin Power Rangers would have touched most of this subject matter with a 10-foot pole. Ultimately, today we are covering two Zyuranger episodes that are adapted into two Power Rangers episodes. But there's very little footage from those two episodes that are actually used. I'm surprised Power Rangers didn't skip this entirely, except for the fact that it's too important to skip. But that's good news for us because it makes for a lot of weird differences to compare. So everything about the tower is removed, everything about children sacrificed to the tower is removed, the cards are removed. What is kept is the monster and, surprisingly, the whole Satan thing. They just call him Lokar now. But even the elements they keep end up being trimmed for what could be considered objectionable content. Rita spends much of the episode chanting incantations just like Bondora. A bit of it is trimmed out though. The moment where Bondora temporarily goes blind and starts bleeding from the eyes. Yeah, I forgot to mention that hypersensitive parents are also a bit squeamish towards eye stigmata. Go figure. Also, after Dai Satan appears, he breathes on Zombie Frankie to upgrade him again into Satan Frankie. Satan Frankie more or less bursts forth from Zombie Frankie. Lokar does this to Mutitis in Power Rangers, but all the bursting and splitting is cut out. The shot cuts away, and he has a new form. The monster itself is the biggest difference, but not because of alterations to the footage. It's imposed almost entirely through context. Mutitis is a completely separate monster from the Frankenstein's monster, not an upgrade. Rita conjures him the same way she does Lokar. That, to me, is the wildest element to this, that a multi-part story can be seamlessly separated out by just claiming it's a different monster, and giving it a different origin. Before Dai Satan gets his breath into him, Dora Frankie is super strong because Pleprecon created him with Dokita clay. Mutitis is super strong because Finster didn't make him at all. A fact Rita is not shy about rubbing in.
Finster, I made my own monster, and it's winning!
Yeah, Pleprecon and Finster aren't seen this time around, and in the American footage that makes sense, as his voice actor Robert Axelrod is voicing Lokar. Yeah, I haven't watched or followed Power Rangers in decades, but don't think I didn't notice that Lord Zed laugh. We've talked about what Power Rangers doesn't do, so what does it do to fill the time? Well, it does quite a few things. First off, it places emphasis on Zack. He's in a dance competition, but he just doesn't have any self-confidence, for some reason. Apparently he's competing against Bulk, so he should be fine. The episode basically repeats an entire sequence from way back in Different Drum. Actually, counting the resolution in part 2, it repeats it twice. And I want to point out, I love when they light the youth center more dimly. They did this in Green with Evil part 1 as well. I just had too many things to talk about to mention it there. Based on this precedent of twice, they seem to reserve this for big event episodes, and it does succeed in creating a gloomier atmosphere. It's hard to call this a Zack story, though. His problem bookends the 2 episodes, but it exists more to set up the overall conflict that all the Rangers will face. See, the titular Island of Illusion is added to Rita's plan to replace the whole child sacrifice thing. Some footage from the next episode of Zyuranger is pushed forward, just like in Life's a Masquerade, so that the Rangers are totally defeated and Rita can banish them to her island. Originally, this footage shows the Zyurangers falling into Barai's timeless room, but let's hold off on that until the next episode. Here, though, Power Rangers does something interesting. They pull a little bit of footage from a much earlier 2-parter, Land of Despair. The miniature shots of the strange realm where the Zyurangers find their weapons at the beginning of the series become MMPR's Island of Illusion. The Power Rangers are stripped of their communicators and morphers, and illusions that make them lose their confidence cause them to disappear, which happens to Zack as the first episode's cliffhanger. It could be a coincidence, but this seems to be inspired by Land of Despair's danger of turning to stone after feeling sorrow. I also think it's fair to say it's inspired by the quest the Zyurangers are going to undertake in the next episode to resolve their own conflict. Power Rangers simply got a head start because they had so little from this episode they could use. I criticized Power Rangers heavily for abandoning this plot, so it's nice to see some kind of original, outdoor, dangerous quest. I'm very excited about this. In concept. As I said, footage is pushed up in order to reach a point in the Lokar battle where Power Rangers can insert this Island of Illusion story. But like with Life's a Masquerade, I'm convinced this is also done so that Tommy can feature in the episode. Barai is once again a no-show this time around, but he does make an appearance very early in the next episode, joining the battle against Satan Frankie. Moving that footage up into this episode allows for the usual Tommy stays behind for reason and joins up at the last possible minute formula. So what is the reason this time? Well, Tommy is introduced teaching a karate class to 2 young boys. The Power Rangers leap into action when the summoning of Lokar causes an earthquake. Tommy, however, decides he can't leave his students behind and stays with them at the youth center. That's certainly a new one and a fairly altruistic reason. It does get kind of silly when we come back to him, though. See, the problem is, unlike most of Tommy's absences, which get him out of the way before he knows there's a problem, this one gets him out of the way with the stated expectation that he will join them when he's able. So it's quite a laugh to see him chilling at the juice bar while the kids play video games. Putting aside my confusion as to where these parents are who don't seem to care if their kids are caught in a monster attack, Ernie is there. When Zordon contacts Tommy to tell him of the danger he already knows about, Tommy asks Ernie to look after the kids. So why didn't he do that before now? As always, we're in a logic-free zone. That doesn't mean I'm letting Zyuranger off the hook either, which has a sequence that left my jaw on the floor. So, back to the child sacrifice thing. Can't have any fun without that, you know? The Zyurangers discover the cards as a link to who gets kidnapped and take the proactive step of looking for other cards before the child is taken. They try to warn parents, and they eventually decide to guard the last girl until a fight distracts them and allows her to be taken. But when the heroes transform... Zyuranger! What? You're telling me she didn't know they were the Zyurangers until they transformed in front of her? Remember, the Zyurangers don't have secret identities. They're public figures and everyone seems to know who they are. I assumed Yuka knew that from the outset because it was the only thing keeping this sequence from looking completely ridiculous. It still looks mostly ridiculous. However, it's not as ridiculous as the child going, "Oh, hello, random adult strangers who have accosted me on the way to school to tell me that I'm in danger and want to follow me wherever I go in a creepy-looking circular formation that prevents anyone else from seeing me." That premise sounds completely safe and legitimate, and I have no issues at all following it to the letter. I take it back. This moment could be considered harmful to children watching. So I guess it's reasonable to assume that the mother they talked to earlier also didn't know who they were, and was completely accepting of these weirdos coming to her home and informing her son was about to be kidnapped by witch magic. I complain, because it's ridiculous, but it does make the episode quite a bit funnier. Because of this brief child bit, Mei, who is the designated caregiver, does not join the others when they form Daijujin to fight Zombie Frankie. But I don't really get this. Daijujin can act independently, and he really should right now, given that this child is all that stands between the world and the devil. Leaving Mei to single-handedly fight off Grifazar, Lami, and multiple golems while keeping an eye on the girl is certainly going to end exactly how it ends. That's enough for the first half. It's hard to score these because they're very different. They're even structured differently as first halves. Zyuranger's cliffhanger is the threat of the monster. Power Rangers pushes far past that to make the threat of the island the cliffhanger. Still, for story, I'm giving it to Zyuranger. Zyuranger has two connected plots across these two episodes. This one is the race to stop Dai Satan from being summoned. Power Rangers is almost entirely set up, padded out with tons of Zord summoning and the like. There is no tension in regards to summoning Lokar, it just takes up a lot of time. Everything exists to get us to the island, which is fine, but I sure hope that pays off next time. For characters, neither is really that focused on character, but I guess Power Rangers technically wins by giving Zack and Tommy character-focused moments. The Zyurangers are just doing their regular stuff, and even Yuka is a prop rather than a character. For action, Power Rangers has one of the better team putty fights I've seen that manages to feel tense while not resorting to nausea-inducing camera or editing tricks. I'd say it somewhat makes up for Power Rangers having to lose most of the Zyuranger fight sequences. Still, it also loses stuff like this rotting hand pulling Yuka into the water, the discretionary editing of Satan Frankie and Bondora's bleeding eyes, and it's very cool seeing Lami lead a pack of cloaked golems into the night to steal your children. I leave Power Rangers excited about where the creepy island stuff is going to go, but I think Zyuranger is slightly better, and so Zyuranger manages to win for this first part. Both stories conclude here with the heroes unlocking their ultimate robots to destroy the monster and fight off the big floating head. But that's ultimately only a few minutes of each episode, and I don't even care about that. You know what? I'm gonna go ahead and start with Power Rangers first because, well, I just have to. I was so excited going into Island of Illusion Part 2. First off, I'm pretty sure I've never seen this two-parter before. At the very least, it's not ringing even the slightest of nostalgic bells for me. But it also seemed like the most ambitious episode Power Rangers has done up to this point. It's its own plot, it's its own location, it shoots tons of original footage that focuses on the Rangers' fears and insecurities. I can see the idea of fading away due to a lack of confidence terrifying kids in the best way. The cliffhanger sold me on it being exactly the kind of low-budget, imaginative kids show adventure that I so praised Land of Despair for. I knew I was going to love this episode. I hated this episode. That's not because it's a clip show. Someone had told me that before going in. I have nothing against clip shows to begin with. I hate this episode because it's tediously repetitive. A ranger is hit with an illusion that drains their self-esteem and causes them to fade. The other rangers yell at the victim to think positive thoughts. They call for Quagmire, a magical rhyming dwarf. He says the same thing the Rangers did, but he rhymes when he does it. The victim recalls a very brief flashback of fighting something. The victim stops fading. A ranger is hit with an illusion that drains their self-esteem and causes them to fade. The other rangers yell at the victim to think positive thoughts. They call for Quagmire, a magical rhyming dwarf. He says the same thing the Rangers did, but he rhymes when he does it. The victim recalls a very brief flashback of fighting something. The victim stops fading. A ranger is hit with an illusion that drains their self-esteem, and are you annoyed with me yet? This episode does that 6 times. The only thing that differs is the specific illusion. A few of those illusions are somewhat interesting on their own, like when Tommy thinks his friends are putties and attacks them. Kimberly losing her confidence after seeing Bulk and Skull as turtles saving angels makes no sense at all, but at least it's entertaining. Then you get Trini and Billy who fade with no external threat whatsoever, which would be disappointing except that it cuts to the chase a little bit faster. However you look at it, this is a case of a group of characters witnessing the same lesson being taught 6 times and failing to ever learn from it. This is not entirely dissimilar to Reborn: The Ultimate God. In both cases, the 6 heroes have to realize something about themselves, and it's only when all of them accomplish that they are able to return to the battle. So how does Zyuranger do this in a way that's much less tedious? Well, in their case, Clotho pulls them from the battle and sends them on a quest to unlock Ultimate Daijujin. It's not much of a quest, it basically amounts to them going to a summer camp and finding a doctor for kids who have been affected by Dai Satan's breath. A fight breaks out, and it's a shame Power Rangers can't use this because it's pretty cool. Barai wields a giant log at one point. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if its imitable nature is why they didn't use it. Eventually, the Zyurangers find a shrine where they have to insert their medallions and proclaim their individual virtues. They're rather stumped on that since Zyuranger has been somewhat lacking in characterization. But then they realize that the actions they've taken on their journey represent who they are. See the difference? In Zyuranger, actions occur as a natural part of the story. At first glance, they don't necessarily seem to be anything other than that. Well, Don proclaiming he has more guts than anybody seems a bit awkward until you realize it's awkwardly setting up his epiphany for later. Aside from that, though, they're simply entertaining moments in their own right, and tie into solving the quest all at once, rather than being dragged out and repeated for an entire episode. Power Rangers really needed to take more inspiration from this. Maybe they could have had the Rangers split up into their own trials, which each resolve differently. Quagmire can teach each of them something different. Later, when they're reunited, they realize what they need to learn from their trials to get off the island. Once. Just one time. Not 6 times. Zyuranger's problem with this is characterization. As I said, that's been their problem. As such, their epiphanies feel somewhat informed. Don't get me wrong, they're fine. They aren't necessarily out of character. Goshi is definitely the warrior of intelligence. It's just that the descriptors and actions are vague enough that a lot of them could be applied to other characters. May taking care of the children labels her the warrior of love, but Boy fetches the doctor, so couldn't that be considered an act of love too? Don is the warrior of courage for talking about his guts and refusing to stay down when beaten, but couldn't that also be a sign of power, which is Barai's virtue? Geki takes a leap of faith into a waterfall despite the danger, which seems both courageous and hopeful. Geki is the only character who doesn't get a flashback at all, but everyone knows he was going to be the warrior of justice because he rambles on about justice to the point of self-parody. Despite my nitpicking, the sequence works well enough, certainly far better than what Island of Illusion attempts. The result is a sequence that's cheesy as hell, but I can't deny it's inspiring. I enjoyed it so much I ran it back and watched it again. The main difference between these two quests is that one isn't a quest, it's a punishment. In MMPR, the Island of Illusion is Rita's attempt to destroy the Power Rangers. In Zyuranger, the Dr. Daycamp trip is a quest the good spirits impose on the Zyurangers in order to upgrade their arsenal. And they use that upgrade to finally defeat the monsters that have been plaguing them for several episodes. That presents a bit of a problem for Power Rangers. Actually, that presents a major problem for Power Rangers. After they conquer their self-esteem problems, the Power Rangers return to the battle against Mutitus and Lokar, and they just have new stuff now. Congratulations! Jason knows what all of it is, knows that Titanus is involved. It blows my mind that I never knew that this was how Mega Dragon Zord and Ultra Zord entered the picture. Well, you know, the actual Mega Dragon Zord and not what they've been calling Mega Dragon Zord for the past few episodes. So that's great. They have no introduction at all, they just are. But wait, you say? Wheel of Misfortune aired between the episodes we covered last time and the episodes we're covering today. Because of that, that episode introduces Ultra Zord. Yeah, I know. And that's just as bad because, again, there's no introduction, it just is. Also, that means Ultra Zord appears an episode before its lesser form, the Mega Dragon Zord. Fun. I'm not letting Zyuranger off the hook either, though. There is still a lot that Geki just seems to know, including, again, that King Brachion is part of the Ultimate Daijujin configuration. It messes up, but it doesn't mess up nearly as hard as Power Rangers does. Interestingly, there is very little shared footage between these. It's just the monster fight at the end. However, these do feel more narratively connected than the first parts, so let's score these, even though it should be pretty obvious. For story, not only does Zyuranger accomplish everything I mentioned already, but it furthers Barai's storyline. The other Zyurangers meet Clotho. Clotho explains why Barai is on a time limit, that he was crushed to death while he was asleep. It explains that Daijujin resurrected him because he was needed to complete Daijujin's restoration to his ultimate form. It still doesn't explain how Barai became a Zyuranger in the first place, but there we are. Zyuranger wins. For characters, both episodes focus on the character's specific attributes, or at least they try to. Honestly though, Jason's fear that he has led his team to their deaths is the only illusion that ties into a core character trait. Bulk and Skull being good people doesn't tell us anything about Kimberly. Again, Zack's lack of confidence bookends the story, and I'm not saying that self-doubt has to be rational, but nothing he experiences on the island really gives any insight as to what his problem is or how to solve it. So while Zyuranger's character virtues are very basic, at least they're consistently applied. Zyuranger wins. For action, most of the action in Power Rangers is in the clips, but they're not even good clips. They're too short and devoid of context to be interesting. Goshi, Dan, and Barai versus the forces of Bandora is one of the most visually interesting fights I've seen so far, utilizing strategy and various weapons. Zyuranger wins. It's a clean sweep. Thanks so much for watching. As I've said, I don't think I've ever seen this before, and I'm not really engaged with the community, so I have no idea if I just torched a beloved Mighty Morphin Power Rangers story. It wouldn't have changed my outlook if it was, but, you know. What I'm saying is, it's thanks to my patrons I can even make videos like this. So, if you were offended by how I treated Island of Illusion, it's their fault, not mine. But a lot of them did know how I felt about it earlier than you did because seeing videos early is one of the rewards I give. So, you know, if that's something that interests you.